Have you ever watched a smug executive in a tailored suit prepare to destroy your career in front of hundreds of people while you only feel amused? That was me last Friday night. Our new vice president thought he could use me as a scapegoat to hide a fraud worth millions of dollars. He planned my public ruin perfectly for the annual gala. He just did not know my uninvited guests came with federal badges and handcuffs. Buckle up. Hello to the amazing audience of the Boss Revenge Stories channel, and I sincerely thank you for being here with us today. Because YouTube has unfortunately demonetized our channel and left us without an operating budget, we kindly ask that if you enjoy today's story, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon channel. There, you can hear even better, longer, and more detailed exclusive true stories featuring multiple emotional voice actors that we cannot publish on YouTube, which you can easily access by scanning the Patreon QR code on the screen or clicking the link in the description or comments of this video. Now, let us dive right into today's story, told by our protagonist, Freya Walsh. I am 38 years old, and as the Director of Risk Management at Aegis Health Logistics, located in the biting cold of Chicago, my entire professional life is built on concrete data and irrefutable numbers. I do not deal in human emotions. I do not believe in empty corporate promises. And I certainly do not buy into flashy presentations designed to dazzle the naive. Aegis was a titan in the medical supply chain industry, housed in a towering skyscraper made of gleaming glass and steel that pierced the gloomy Midwestern sky. From the outside, it stood as a proud beacon of modern healthcare logistics, a flawless machine moving life-saving equipment across the country. Inside, however, a slow and toxic rot was beginning to spread beneath the humming neon lights and the polished marble floors. The primary catalyst for this rapid decay walked through our heavy glass doors exactly 6 months ago. His name was Marcus Vance, the newly appointed Vice President of Innovation. Marcus was a textbook tech bro, the exact kind of guy who wore custom-tailored, slim-fit performance suits and flashed a blindingly confident, perfectly white smile that never quite reached his cold, calculating eyes. He did not speak in practical business strategies or logistical realities. He spoke entirely in hollow buzzwords. Every single board meeting with him was a dizzying, exhausting barrage of phrases like algorithm optimization, synergistic paradigms, and disruptive thinking. He acted like he was the visionary savior our aging company desperately needed, but to someone like me, a woman who meticulously analyzed corporate liabilities and hidden dangers for a living, he looked exactly like a massive, walking red flag. It did not take long for Marcus to initiate his silent but ruthless campaign to clean house. Almost immediately upon taking power, he launched a strategic purge, one by one, the veteran employees, the seasoned professionals who actually understood the intricate, highly regulated web of medical logistics, were quietly let go, aggressively pushed out, or forced into sudden early retirement. In their place, Marcus brought in a sprawling swarm of young, vastly inexperienced lackeys. These new hires knew absolutely nothing about the strict federal compliance laws governing the transport of sensitive medical supplies. However, they possessed the singular trait Marcus truly valued above all else: blind, unquestioning loyalty. They operated as his personal echo chamber, a unified wall of nodding heads ready to execute his most reckless commands without a single shred of hesitation or critical thought. The absolute worst of these sweeping changes was the forced implementation of his ultimate pet project, a brand new, unproven inventory management software called Onyx AI. Marcus aggressively pushed this system down our throats, heavily advertising it to the gullible board of directors as a supreme artificial intelligence that would completely revolutionize our entire supply chain overnight. We were boldly promised that Onyx would slash our operational costs by 25% and streamline every single warehouse route in a matter of weeks. But the reality on the cold concrete floors of our distribution centers was a complete and utter disaster. As the head of risk management, I was naturally the very first person to notice the severe structural cracks. Onyx was not just experiencing minor glitches, It was making catastrophic routing errors on a daily basis, highly sensitive, tightly regulated medical supplies, including temperature-controlled pharmaceuticals and staggeringly expensive surgical equipment, were suddenly and consistently being marked as misplaced, misrouted, or completely lost in transit. I immediately went to work, compiling hundreds of pages of comprehensive risk assessment reports, detailing exactly how much inventory we were hemorrhaging week after week. I marched into his corner office and placed these damning documents directly on Marcus's pristine glass desk. Every single time I raised the alarm, he simply brushed me off with his signature condescending smirk. "Trust the algorithm. Freya, we are just experiencing some minor growing pains as we transition into the future," he would say smoothly, casually tossing my hours of hard work into his bottom drawer without even glancing at the figures. But I knew better. I had spent over 15 years hunting down operational anomalies and corporate waste, and the persistent errors Onyx was making did not look like random software bugs. They were far too precise, far too selective. The system was consistently losing high-value, untraceable items on the black market, while perfectly routing the cheap, bulk goods like latex gloves and saline bags. My finely tuned gut instinct began screaming that this was not a technical failure at all. This was a deliberate heist. Someone was intentionally manipulating the logistical data. I knew right then that there was an unseen, highly organized network operating right under our noses, systematically altering the delivery routes to quietly smuggle out millions of dollars in sensitive medical goods. And the man sitting comfortably at the top of the innovation department was the one fiercely protecting the very system that made the entire operation possible. The isolation began silently, a creeping shadow that slowly choked the life out of my daily operations. It started with my digital footprint. One Tuesday morning, I tried to log into the main financial server to cross-reference the latest warehouse routing logs, only to be met with a cold, blinking red banner declaring my credentials invalid. My high-level administrative access, a clearance I had held without question for nearly a decade, was quietly revoked overnight. When I confronted the IT department, they averted their eyes, muttering nervously about new security protocols mandated by the innovation department, but the digital exile was only the first tightening of the knot. 2 days later, my brilliant and fiercely loyal executive assistant was abruptly terminated. Human Resources cited budget restructuring, but we both knew the truth. They handed her a cardboard box and escorted her out of the building before she could even say a proper goodbye. Suddenly, my calendar went entirely blank. The crucial strategic planning meetings, the executive risk assessments, the weekly logistical roundtables. I was systematically uninvited from all of them. I was completely walled off, stranded on a deserted island in the middle of a bustling corporate ocean, left to watch the ships pass by without me. Then, the storm finally broke. A surprise internal audit crashed down on my department with the destructive force of a hurricane. It was not a routine check. It was a targeted, aggressive inquisition. The external auditors, handpicked by Marcus, swarmed my office like vultures. Within 48 hours, they produced a devastating preliminary report. They did not just find minor discrepancies, they unearthed a gaping, bleeding wound in the company finances. Exactly $4 million was missing, swallowed up in a chaotic maze of vendor payments and phantom service fees. Worse still, the audit exposed massive internal data compliance violations, proving that highly restricted patient information had been grossly mishandled. The air in my office grew heavy and suffocating as the auditors presented their findings. But the true masterpiece of Marcus and his manipulation was yet to come. They slid a thick manila folder across my desk. Inside were dozens of printed email chains and digital authorization forms. I stared at the papers, the blood draining from my face. There, at the bottom of every single disastrous vendor contract, every gross data mishandling approval, was my digital signature. Marcus had orchestrated an incredibly sophisticated forgery. He had spoofed my internal email address and fabricated a flawless digital paper trail. effectively framing me as the sole architect of the entire catastrophe. The documents painted a crystal clear, legally binding picture showing that I was the one who had recklessly chosen the fraudulent vendors and bypassed the safety protocols, directly causing the $4 million hemorrhage. Sitting there, staring at my own forged name, the horrifying reality washed over me. I was not just being pushed out, I was being fattened up for the slaughter. I was the perfect, meticulously crafted scapegoat. Marcus needed someone to take the catastrophic fall so he could emerge completely spotless, the tragic hero who bravely uncovered the corruption. Pinning this massive failure entirely on the veteran head of risk management would cement his reputation as a ruthless, effective leader. It was his golden ticket, his guaranteed path to easily claiming the chief executive officer chair by early next year. If I fought back loudly, if I marched into the boardroom screaming about forged emails and conspiracies without hard proof, I would just look like a desperate, guilty woman having a pathetic mental breakdown. He had all the fake evidence. I had nothing but my word. So, instead of fighting, I decided to give Marcus exactly what he wanted. I became the broken woman he engineered me to be. I started showing up to the office with dark, sunken circles under my eyes and wrinkled blouses. I let my hands tremble visibly whenever I handed him paperwork. I submitted late, agonizingly apologetic reports, completely accepting the blame for my supposed lack of oversight. During our brief encounters in the hallway, I would lower my head, my voice cracking as I begged him for a little more time to fix the mess. I played the role of the defeated, exhausted, and utterly submissive subordinate to absolute perfection. It is completely out of my hands now, Freya, but I will see what I can do to soften the blow with the board. Marcus told me one afternoon, practically glowing with smug satisfaction as he watched me quietly weep into my hands. He thought he had completely destroyed me. He thought my spirit was crushed, my career buried under a mountain of his manufactured guilt. His overwhelming arrogance made him dangerously sloppy. He never once suspected that beneath my carefully constructed facade of total despair, my mind was operating with lethal precision. While he was busy gloating over my public suffering, I was locked in my office, quietly typing lines of code into a hidden terminal. 5 years ago, long before Marcus even knew this company existed, I had secretly built a highly encrypted, invisible backdoor directly into the lowest, most foundational levels of the corporate network infrastructure. It was my ultimate insurance policy, an emergency fail-safe that bypassed every single modern security protocol he had installed. With tears still perfectly wet on my cheeks, I pressed the enter key. The silent, invisible door swung wide open, granting me absolute, unrestricted access to the deepest financial databases. The hunt for the missing $4 million had officially begun, and Marcus was completely blind to the crosshairs currently locked onto his back. The invisible door I had unlocked was narrow, but it was enough to slip through into the pitch-black basement of the corporate servers. My office was completely dark, lit only by the pale, ghostly glow of my dual monitors. The clock on the wall read 2 a.m. Outside, the city of Chicago was asleep, but my heart was hammering a relentless, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I felt like a burglar creeping through a silent house, terrified that one wrong keystroke would trip an alarm. I bypassed the shiny, user-friendly interface of Onyx and dug directly into its foundational source code. What I found down there was not a masterpiece of modern software engineering. It was a digital ghost town. Onyx was heavily marketed to our board of directors as a constantly learning neural network, a system capable of predicting supply chain bottlenecks before they even happened. I expected to find incredibly complex algorithms, advanced logic gates, and machine learning pathways. Instead, as I peeled back the encrypted layers, I found a terrifyingly simple script. There was absolutely no artificial intelligence core. The entire system was an empty shell, a beautifully designed graphic interface covering a massive, highly illegal data funnel. My stomach churned as I followed the data packets to see exactly what this program was doing. The system was taking our highly sensitive, tightly regulated inventory requests, which included detailed patient medical histories, specialized pharmaceutical needs, and exact delivery coordinates, and intentionally stripping them of their basic security protocols. It was then bundling this raw, unprotected information and transmitting it over the internet to a third-party server located halfway across the globe. Onyx was not processing anything on its own. It was routing the information to a massive warehouse filled with thousands of cheap, manual labor workers in a foreign country. These underpaid individuals were reading confidential patient files on unsecured monitors and manually typing routing instructions back into our system to make it look like an automated process. It was a catastrophic breach of federal medical privacy laws. If the federal authorities ever found out about this, the fines alone would instantly bankrupt the entire logistics network, and the executive leadership would face decades in a federal prison. But the horror did not stop there. I needed to know exactly where the money was going. I opened a second terminal and began cross-referencing the vendor invoices that Marcus had fraudulently signed using my forged digital signature. I tracked the missing $4 million as it bled out of our operational budget. The massive sum was cleverly chopped into dozens of smaller, seemingly insignificant payments disguised as monthly software licensing fees and external optimization consulting retainers. I traced these recurring payments through a dizzying labyrinth of offshore shell companies. It took me 3 grueling nights of tracing digital breadcrumbs, untangling corporate structures registered in isolated tax havens. Finally, all the money funneled into a single, private holding company. I ran a comprehensive background check on the registered board of directors for that specific holding company. The primary stakeholder and chief financial beneficiary was a man named Richard Vance. I did a quick public records search and felt a cold, bitter smile stretch across my face. Richard was the brother-in-law of Marcus. The entire innovation initiative, the massive budget reallocation, the ruthless firing of the veteran staff, it was all an elaborate, meticulously designed heist. The missing $4 million had flowed directly into the pockets of his extended family. Marcus was literally robbing the company blind to fund a lavish lifestyle, using a fake artificial intelligence program as his digital getaway vehicle, and using me as the convenient human shield to take the bullets when the accounting alarms inevitably rang. I quickly compiled the bank routing numbers, the offshore registration documents, and the source code proving the existence of the manual data farm into a single, highly encrypted folder. My finger hovered over the mouse button, ready to send this explosive package directly to the Internal Ethics Committee and the highest members of the board of directors. But the deep paranoia that had kept me alive in this cutthroat industry for 15 years suddenly flared up. I paused. I opened the network traffic monitor and closely examined the outgoing email server protocols. My blood ran completely cold. Marcus was incredibly arrogant, but he was certainly not stupid. He had anticipated that someone, somewhere, might eventually try to blow the whistle. Embedded deep within the internal reporting portal was a sophisticated, automated audit trap. I read the malicious script line by line, my eyes widening in sheer disbelief. If anyone attempted to attach files containing the keywords associated with Onyx, Richard Vance, or the offshore bank accounts and send them to the executive board, the email would never actually leave the outbox. Instead, the system would immediately trigger a self-destruct sequence, permanently wiping the attached evidence from the server. Simultaneously, it would lock down the sender's computer, flash a massive unauthorized hacking alert across the entire building's security grid, and permanently log the exact internet protocol address of the person who tried to send it. If I had clicked send, I would have instantly destroyed my only leverage and handed Marcus the absolute final nail for my coffin. I was trapped inside a digital minefield. Every single internal avenue for justice was rigged to blow up in my face. The next morning, I sat at my desk, staring blankly at the wall, trying to find a safe way out of the maze. A quiet, hesitant knock broke my intense concentration. It was David, a junior information technology technician I had helped out of a very tight spot a few years ago when he accidentally crashed a minor department server. He slipped into my office, looking around nervously as if the walls were listening, and handed me a folded piece of paper before quickly walking away without saying a single word. I carefully unfolded the paper under my desk, keeping it out of view of the glass door. It was a printed transcript of a private calendar invite Marcus had just sent to the corporate events coordination team. The event was the Medical Pioneers Gala, our most prestigious annual industry gathering scheduled for next Friday night. There would be hundreds of wealthy investors, hospital administrators, and media personnel attending. At the bottom of the printed schedule, right next to the 8 o'clock keynote speech slot assigned to Marcus, David had highlighted a specific, highly confidential note Marcus had added for the audio and visual production team. The note read, "Prepare a solemn, focused lighting cue for this segment. I will be making a necessary public executive decision regarding the recent risk management financial failures and announcing the immediate termination of Freya Walsh for gross incompetence and severe unethical conduct." I stopped breathing for a long moment. The sheer, theatrical cruelty of his plan was staggering. He was not just going to fire me in a quiet, private human resources meeting. He was going to execute my professional reputation on a brightly lit stage in front of the entire healthcare industry. By publicly condemning me as a corrupt, incompetent manager who personally caused a $4 million loss, he would instantly discredit anything I might ever try to say afterward. If I went to the police after being publicly fired and completely disgraced, it would just look like the bitter, desperate revenge of a criminal trying to smear the brilliant corporate hero who caught her. He was planning to cut off my tongue before I even had the chance to speak my truth. I slowly crumpled the piece of paper in my tightly clenched fist. The internal reporting system was a deadly trap. The board of directors was completely blinded by his charming charisma and false promises, and I had exactly 9 days before my career was publicly slaughtered. Marcus wanted a grand theatrical spectacle. He wanted to use the main stage to permanently cement his power and bury my body under the roaring applause of his wealthy peers. I leaned back in my office chair, the heavy exhaustion of the past few weeks completely vanishing, replaced by a cold, razor-sharp clarity. If the internal corporate system was fully corrupted, I had to take this fight entirely outside the system. If he wanted to make my firing a massive public event, I would gladly help him gather the largest audience possible. But I was certainly not going to be the one bleeding on that stage. It was time to stop playing defense in his rigged game. It was time to build a guillotine of my own. I sat in the absolute, suffocating quiet of my living room, the stark white glow of my personal laptop illuminating the darkness. There was no panic left in my system, no residual fear, and certainly no hesitation. I meticulously began the surgical process of organizing the raw, unadulterated data I had extracted from the darkest corners of the corporate network. I created a master digital file, a comprehensive dossier of undeniable guilt. Inside this encrypted vault, I placed the complete banking transaction histories that tracked every single stolen cent routing from our internal accounts to the offshore tax havens. I included the fraudulent vendor contracts, complete with the manipulated digital signatures he had used to mask his elaborate theft. Most importantly, I compiled the raw source code and the horrifying network traffic logs that definitively exposed his highly praised artificial intelligence system as nothing more than a dangerous, illegal manual data farm processing sensitive patient information overseas. Every single digital fingerprint connecting the missing $4 million to his brother-in-law was permanently locked inside this package. I was no longer merely building a defensive case. I was engineering a weapon of mass professional destruction. I knew far better than to trust our internal human resources department or the current board of directors. They were completely compromised, either actively complicit in his schemes or willfully blinded by his magnetic charm and hollow promises of record-breaking profits. Presenting this evidence to them would only result in my immediate, quiet termination and the destruction of the data. Instead, I routed my internet connection through a series of secure, untraceable virtual private networks and prepared an anonymous, heavily fortified transmission. I addressed the first package directly to the Enforcement Division of the Securities and Exchange Commission, highlighting the massive financial fraud and blatant shareholder deception. The second transmission went straight to the Cybercrime and Corporate Espionage Division of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, detailing the severe violations of federal medical privacy laws. I was taking this battle completely out of the corporate arena and dropping it squarely into federal jurisdiction. However, federal agencies operate at their own slow, methodical, bureaucratic pace, and I required an immediate, violently explosive reaction on the night of the gala. I needed the ultimate apex predator to descend upon the celebration. I drafted a top-secret, highly confidential email addressed to Elias Thorne. Elias was the reclusive chief executive officer and founder of our massive parent conglomerate. He was a terrifying phantom of a man who rarely made public appearances, choosing to govern his vast corporate empire from a heavily fortified private estate halfway across the country. He was notoriously legendary for his ruthless efficiency, his razor-sharp intellect, and his absolute zero tolerance for corporate embarrassment or financial theft. My message to him was deliberately brief, clinical, and completely devoid of any emotional pleading. The Chicago Logistics Division you oversee is exactly 48 hours away from a catastrophic federal raid and a complete public collapse. The sole architect of this massive criminal destruction will be speaking on center stage at the Industry Gala on Friday night. I highly recommend you attend the event in person to salvage whatever fragments are left of your empire. I attached a localized version of the master evidence file to his message. Here was the true, cold-blooded masterpiece of my entire strategy. I did not send them open, easily readable files. I custom-built a highly advanced cryptographic countdown timer directly into the core foundation of the data package. The federal agents and Elias Thorne could download the massive gigabytes of data immediately, but they would only see scrambled, completely unbreakable strings of code. I hard-coded a self-executing decryption key tied directly to a highly precise global atomic clock. The files were strictly programmed to automatically unlock, completely exposing the entire criminal operation to the authorities. At exactly 8 o'clock in the evening on Friday night, that was the exact, precise minute the vice president was scheduled to stand under the bright stage lights, hold a microphone, and proudly announce my termination to the entire healthcare industry. By the time he opened his mouth to destroy my life, the highest authorities in the nation would be reading his federal arrest warrant. For the remaining days leading up to the grand event, I transformed myself into the perfect, tragic ghost of a corporate failure. I walked through the brightly lit office corridors with my shoulders heavily slumped and my gaze firmly fixed on the floorboards. I deliberately wore wrinkled blazers and completely stopped wearing any makeup, allowing the deep, dark exhaustion to show clearly on my pale face. I brought small cardboard boxes into my office and began slowly, visibly packing my personal belongings. I took down my framed professional degrees and placed my favorite coffee mug into a box, leaving my desk looking barren and defeated. I wanted him to see me completely broken whenever he strolled past my glass door, humming a cheerful tune and practically vibrating with arrogant victory. I would quickly look away, playing the part of the humiliated loser waiting for the executioner to strike. Make sure you clear out your desk by Friday afternoon. It will save security the trouble of doing it for you, he sneered during one of his passing rounds, his voice dripping with condescending pity. I understand, I whispered softly, keeping my head bowed in total submission. The atmosphere in the office was electric with anticipation for the gala, but my mind was a vast ocean of terrifying, absolute calm. Every single piece was perfectly positioned on the board. The countdown was ticking silently in the background of the universe. The vice president genuinely believed he was forcing me to dig my own professional grave. He thought I was standing at the absolute bottom of the dark pit, trembling in helpless fear. He had absolutely no idea that I was simply waiting for him to step up to the edge so I could pour 1,000 tons of solid concrete over his head. The grand ballroom of the most opulent luxury hotel in downtown Chicago was a masterclass in corporate excess and manufactured brilliance. Tonight, the sprawling room was entirely transformed to celebrate a magnificent lie. Suspended high above the polished marble floors, Massive crystal chandeliers cast a blinding, fragmented light over the sea of attendees. A live jazz quartet played softly in the corner, their smooth, dueling melodies deliberately chosen to drown out the vicious whispers of corporate espionage and ruthless ambition. The vast space was packed shoulder to shoulder with wealthy venture capitalists, arrogant hospital administrators, and ambitious tech tycoons. They were all eagerly clinking incredibly expensive crystal flutes filled with vintage champagne, continuously toasting to the glorious technological future that Marcus had completely fabricated from thin air. It felt exactly like a grand masquerade, where everyone wore tailored silk suits and designer gowns instead of masks. They were completely blind to the rotting, illegal foundation crumbling directly beneath their expensive leather shoes. The air inside the ballroom was overwhelmingly thick, suffocatingly heavy with the scent of imported cologne, exotic perfumes, and blind, unchecked greed. For the past 2 weeks, I had meticulously played the pathetic, broken victim to absolute perfection. I had hidden in oversized blazers and kept my head bowed in total submission. But tonight, that cowardly ghost was permanently dead and buried. I did not slip into the grand event through a discreet side door, looking like a defeated, terrified subordinate, waiting for the axe to fall. I walked right through the towering main double doors, and I made absolutely sure that every single eye in the room felt the heavy weight of my presence. I was wearing a sharply tailored, floor-length emerald green gown that was both elegant and fiercely intimidating. The rich, dark fabric caught the blinding chandelier light with every calculated step I took. My posture was rigidly straight, completely unyielding, and my head was held impossibly high. I radiated a cold, overwhelming confidence that immediately cut through the warm, fuzzy, alcohol-soaked atmosphere of the party like a sharp blade. Conversations actually paused as I glided past the velvet ropes. Powerful tycoons and seasoned executives physically turned their heads, their expressions rapidly shifting from polite indifference to sudden, sharp curiosity. I was no longer the tragic sacrificial lamb. I was the apex predator stepping onto the hunting ground. I positioned myself strategically near the heavy, dark velvet curtains of the backstage wing, quietly sipping sparkling water from a tall crystal glass, waiting for the theatrical show to begin. That was exactly when Marcus found me. He was practically vibrating with toxic arrogance, wearing a custom tuxedo that undoubtedly cost more than a junior analyst earned in an entire year. He strolled over to my secluded corner with his signature blinding smile. Though his eyes were completely devoid of any human warmth, he leaned in incredibly close, deliberately invading my personal space to assert his dominance, and let out a soft, pitying chuckle that made my skin crawl. "Enjoy your last drink," he whispered right into my ear, his breath smelling heavily of aged scotch and unearned victory. "Later tonight, you will be my classic example of taking out the trash to move the company forward. Try not to make a scene when the security guards escort you out." I did not flinch. I did not take a defensive step back. I simply turned my head, looked him dead in his cold, calculating eyes, and offered him a slow, chillingly polite smile. I did not say a single word in response to his pathetic threat. Instead, I casually lowered my gaze to the sleek smartwatch strapped securely to my left wrist. The digital numbers glowed faintly in the dim, shadowy light of the backstage wing. It was exactly 55 minutes past 7 o'clock. There were exactly 5 minutes remaining until the impenetrable encryption lock on my digital package shattered into a million pieces. Just 5 short minutes until the federal law enforcement agencies and the Supreme Chief Executive Officer received the undisputed, highly illegal truth. Completely oblivious to the invisible guillotine hanging directly over his arrogant neck, Marcus gave his tuxedo jacket a final but dramatic tug and confidently strode out onto the brightly lit main stage. The smooth jazz music abruptly faded into a tense silence. The blinding white spotlights immediately tracked his movement, bathing him in a brilliant, heroic glow designed to make him look like a visionary savior. Behind him, a massive wall-to-wall digital display screen flared to life, displaying a beautifully animated title card boasting about the revolutionary achievements of his fake artificial intelligence system. The entire magnificent ballroom fell into a hushed, breathless silence. The wealthy investors and corporate leaders leaned forward in their plush velvet chairs, eagerly waiting for the powerful vice president to deliver his visionary speech and execute his promised corporate punishment. While Marcus stood proudly at the absolute center of the stage, firmly gripping the microphone and greedily soaking in the adoring silence of his wealthy prey, I remained perfectly still in the shadowy corner of the room. I calmly crossed my arms over the dark emerald fabric of my gown. The frantic, suffocating panic that had haunted my office was completely eradicated, replaced entirely by the profound, absolute stillness of a seasoned hunter watching a massive steel trap snap shut. The seconds ticked away inside my mind with beautiful precision. I was just standing there, breathing in the scent of expensive champagne, peacefully waiting for the ultimate death knell to finally ring across the silent ballroom. The spotlight hit Marcus, bathing him in a brilliant, heroic glow as he stood at the center of the grand stage. He gripped the microphone with both hands, flashing that perfectly manufactured, blinding smile to the hundreds of wealthy investors and corporate leaders sitting in the massive ballroom. He spent the first 10 minutes spinning a magnificent, captivating web of lies. He spoke passionately about the bright future of healthcare logistics, tossing around his favorite hollow buzzwords to roaring applause. But then, his tone shifted. He lowered his voice, putting on a masterful mask of heavy, manufactured sorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, true innovation is never without its painful sacrifices. We must constantly prune the dying branches so the tree may thrive, Marcus announced, his voice echoing powerfully through the crystal-clear sound system. He dramatically raised his hand and pointed directly toward the shadowy wing where I was standing. Tonight, I must publicly address a grave internal failure, due to the gross incompetence, severe ethical violations, and deliberate mismanagement of our Director of Risk Management, Freya Walsh. This company recently suffered a devastating, unrecoverable loss of $4 million, effective immediately. She is terminated. The entire ballroom gasped in collective shock. Hundreds of eyes turned toward the shadows, searching for the disgraced woman he had just publicly executed. I did not hide. I stepped slightly forward into the ambient light, the emerald fabric of my gown shimmering smoothly. I simply crossed my arms and smiled. Right at that exact second, the invisible digital clock struck 8 o'clock in the evening. Before Marcus could utter another self-righteous syllable, the massive, towering screen behind him flickered violently. The pristine, futuristic logo of his artificial intelligence system shattered into 1,000 digital fragments. The screen went pitch black for one agonizingly long second. Then, it aggressively illuminated the entire room with glaring, undeniable truth. High-definition scans of offshore bank routing numbers, heavily redacted patient files from the illegal overseas data farm, and the fraudulent vendor contracts bearing his manipulated digital signatures flooded the massive display. The final, crowning jewel appeared squarely in the center of the screen, a gigantic, high-resolution photograph of his brother-in-law, alongside the legal registration documents, proving he owned the very shell companies that absorbed our missing $4 million. Marcus turned around, his arrogant smile instantly melting into an expression of sheer, unadulterated terror. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a sick, panicked ghost. He frantically tapped the microphone, shouting desperately at the audio and visual booth to cut the power, but I had permanently locked them out of the mainframe. Before he could even attempt to explain away the massive financial ledgers glowing brightly behind him, the heavy, solid oak double doors at the rear of the grand ballroom burst violently open. The heavy wood slammed against the marble walls with the deafening crack of a gunshot. The jazz quartet abruptly stopped playing. The room fell into a deathly, suffocating silence. Elias Thorne, the Supreme Chief Executive Officer of our parent conglomerate, slowly strode down the center aisle. He was a terrifying, towering figure with sharp silver hair and a bespoke charcoal suit, radiating absolute, merciless authority. He was not accompanied by our standard corporate security team. Flanking him on all sides were three stern, imposing federal agents wearing dark navy windbreakers with the three unmistakable yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation printed boldly across their backs. The crowd parted instantly, shrinking away from the terrifying procession. Elias marched straight up the carpeted stairs and stepped onto the stage. Marcus was completely paralyzed, his jaw practically hanging open as the supreme boss he had tried to deceive closed the distance between them. Elias did not say a word at first. He simply reached out and violently yanked the microphone straight out of the trembling hands of his vice president. "Freya Walsh is absolutely not fired," Elias declared, his voice cutting through the thick, tense air like a serrated blade. He turned his cold, furious gaze directly onto the sweating man beside him. "But Marcus, your supposed executive immunity most certainly does not apply to federal corporate fraud." It was the ultimate, undisputed checkmate. The federal agents instantly swarmed the stage. They grabbed Marcus by his tailored shoulders, aggressively forcing his arms behind his back. The sharp, heavy metallic click of the steel handcuffs echoing across the silent ballroom was the single most beautiful sound I had ever heard in my entire life. Suddenly, the stunned silence of the crowd shattered. Absolute chaos erupted. The very same wealthy investors, hospital administrators, and tech tycoons who had just been eagerly toasting to his brilliance suddenly scrambled over each other. They frantically pulled out their smartphones, the blinding white flashes of their cameras firing rapidly as the golden boy of the innovation department was aggressively frog-marched off the stage and dragged toward the exit like a common, pathetic thief. Marcus kept his head down, desperately trying to hide his face from the merciless flashing lights of his former admirers. Elias stood alone on the stage for a moment, silently surveying the frantic, beautiful ruins of the masquerade. He then turned his gaze toward the shadows and looked directly at me. He slowly descended the stairs and walked over to where I stood. "You orchestrated this entire execution," Elias stated quietly, not as a question, but as a firm recognition of fact. "I simply managed a severe corporate risk, sir," I replied smoothly, meeting his intense stare without a single flinch. A faint, dangerous smile ghosted across his usually stoic face. "The vice president chair is currently vacant, and I desperately need someone who actually understands how to clean up this absolute disaster. The division is yours if you want it." I looked at Elias, then looked back at the empty, brightly lit stage. I did not give him a verbal answer. I simply nodded once, picked up my tall crystal flute of vintage champagne, and walked purposefully out of the shadows. I ascended the stairs, standing exactly where Marcus had stood just moments before. I looked out over the sea of panicked, whispering executives. I raised my glass and gently tapped it against the edge of the abandoned microphone. The sharp, crystal ringing sound instantly silenced the entire chaotic ballroom. I looked down at the silent crowd and offered them the cold, razor-sharp smile of their new, undisputed ruler. Every single loose end was violently, gloriously severed. The hunt was officially over. Thank you so much to our wonderful audience for listening to my story today. I would love to know where in the world you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments below. If you found today's story incredibly satisfying and want to support the channel, please consider joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon community. There, you can listen to our best, most exclusive true stories that are far too intense and detailed to publish on YouTube. You can easily join us by scanning the Patreon QR code currently on your screen, or by clicking the direct link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Thank you again, and have a wonderful day.